The following program replaces the interviews originally scheduled for this time.
Dr. Kirk, in view of the violence that resulted from your order to use the city's police to evict rebellious students from the Columbia campus, would you do it again?
Yes, I would do it again because there is no alternative. There seemed to me to be available no alternative except that of complete capitulation to the demands of those who had illegally occupied 4 of our buildings and in a 5th building all of my own offices.
From CBS New York, in color, Face the Nation, a spontaneous and unrehearsed news interview with Dr. Grayson Kirk, president of Columbia University, where this week police were called in to eject student rebels who had occupied campus buildings in New York. Dr. Kirk will be questioned by CBS News correspondent Robert Shackney, Peter Jansen, education editor of Newsweek magazine, and CBS News correspondent Martin Agronsky. We shall resume the interview with Dr. Kirk in a moment.
Dr. Kirk, you say there was no alternative but for you to call the police. Now, some of your faculty members have said flatly that they were still negotiating with the rebellious students and that there was still a chance for a peaceful solution. Now, why, if that's so, did you ignore that opportunity and call the police?
Actually, I think we ignored no opportunity for negotiation. If I had not felt that there was a possible opportunity for negotiation, we would have asked the police to help us clear these buildings much sooner. We began on a basis of negotiation with the students, who were the groups of students who were in these respective buildings. We undertook through the use of administrative officers to see what could be done. We then used people from the outside. We used faculty members representing an ad hoc faculty group who went in and out of the buildings and talked to the students. At no time was there any moderation in any of the students' demands. And so eventually we were driven to the conclusion that the students wished no negotiated arrangement, but wished either our or complete capitulation or the use of force to eject them from the buildings, which also would arouse widespread sympathy for them in many circles.
Sir, why didn't you act tougher sooner? Then why didn't you evict them? What do you think would have happened if you had evicted them the first day when they were holding Dean Coleman and his 2 assistants prisoners?
I'd have lost a great deal more faculty sentiment and a great deal of sentiment throughout the country on the ground that we had resorted prematurely to the use of force and had not exhausted the possibilities of negotiation.
Specifically at Columbia, there seemed to be a special problem with regard to the surrounding community, the black community, the Negro community of Harlem. It's been said that one reason you didn't act sooner is the fear that it might lead to an explosion in Harlem against Columbia. Was this a problem?
It was a problem in our thinking because of the fact that Hamilton Hall, after the first night, was exclusively occupied by black students who were almost totally dissociated from the SDS students who were occupying the other buildings.
Well, in fact, at Hamilton Hall, it seems to be evident that the police used more restraint, that there was more care to avoid violence when the rebellious students were removed than took place in the other buildings.
There was no problem. If I may say so, there was no problem because at Hamilton Hall, unlike the situation in the other buildings, these students behaved themselves like gentlemen. Hamilton Hall was well taken care of. There was no internal vandalism. And we had indications when our final negotiations, which were at about midnight, before the calling in of the police, that the Hamilton Hall people rejected final efforts at negotiation. They'd indicated to us that while they wished to be arrested, they would not resist arrest except for being carried out. Consequently, the problem really didn't arise in the same way.
Well, it seemed, nevertheless, that more care was taken to avoid violence in dealing with the black students than with the white students. Specifically, there were neutral representatives in Hamilton Hall when the police came in. Communications existed with the leaders of the protest in Hamilton Hall among the black students. But as far as I can tell, no such efforts were made by the authorities to avoid that kind of violence in the other buildings? Police simply waited in, and there are charges, as you know, of police excesses. Didn't you expect this?
I think this is due more to the lack of receptivity on part of the others to efforts at negotiation than to any deliberate desire on our part to have greater violence in one area than another.
Sir, what did the administration do to prevent violence by the police? Why didn't you show yourself on the campus that night?
That evening, of course, we had to begin plans for this about 12 hours before. We worked with the highest police officers in the city. We had magnificent cooperation from them. We assured them that our problem was not to produce arrests, but to empty the buildings. That we, of course, prepared a legal warning which would be read by a university representative over a bullhorn, asking people to leave, indicating that if they left voluntarily, they would not be charged with criminal trespass, and that their only resistance to eviction would get them into any difficulty. We also told the police that we wanted every possible precaution taken to avoid violence. Now,
Do you believe that those precautions were taken?
Obviously, in a large operation of this kind, things do perhaps at times tend to get out of hand. If, as I am told, many bystanders and spectators were injured or were arrested or otherwise involved, I'm deeply apologetic about it, but it was not our plan. It was not our plan at all. And to return to your other question, I was not out on campus because Dr. Truman, the provost and vice president of the university, and I were specifically requested by the police not to do so.
Well, Dr. Kirk, there's now been a question. There was before you called the police, and there is now, of what should be done with the students involved. The official faculty executive committee has recommended to the administration that criminal charges be dropped against the students who were arrested on Tuesday morning. What are you going to do about that? I don't think you've said. And what are you going to do about university discipline against these students, too?
Of course, these are two things, and in the first case, what you're talking about, the dropping of criminal charges, obviously we must make a distinction between the students and the non-students. About 26% of those who were arrested were non-students. For those who resisted arrest, the complainant is the policeman and not the university. That is entirely out of our hands. And the question remains of whether and to what extent the trustees will wish to press or to drop the criminal trespass charges against the other students. This is a matter which I'm sure that they will wish to discuss. It is not a matter within my power to determine.
The decision has not been made.
The decision has not yet been made.
I wonder if we could carry this outside the Columbia University campus. Governor Rockefeller said that he felt that the forces that shake our society, as he put it, are basically constructive. He said we can only gain a sufficient understanding of them to guide them into healthy activity. We might be able to avoid this kind of violence between faculty and students. He said if we'd had a better understanding of the feelings of students in the Columbia situation earlier, a proper action taken a long time ago could have prevented the rebellion. And he says what we have to work for is for fuller understanding. How would you respond to that?
That's a very complex question, and I don't think you can give a simple response to it. Certainly some students did wish and expressed themselves about their desire to have a greater share, honestly to have a greater share in the making of university regulations that affected their student life. We had moved pretty far in this direction. We were preparing to move further. We have been negotiating for some weeks about the appointment of an all-university director of students' interests. That appointment was made quite by coincidence during these past few critical days.
Would students have had any say in that appointment, in choosing the person?
No.
No.
But I must insist upon the fact that some of these student leaders are interested only in that kind of reform that will destroy the American university and the American college as we have known it in the past.
You would disagree with Governor Rockefeller's contention that these forces can be basically constructive.
I would say that some students are of that kind, and that some students feel this way, and the constructive developments can be used and developed. That for other students, I would disagree.
Dr. Kirk, all this leads to, I suppose, what's the basic argument on your campus. The students and a number of your faculty simply say that under the present arrangement, while they can talk, their words are rarely listened to. In regard to discipline, your official faculty committee has made a recommendation, yet 4 or 5 days after that recommendation about dropping criminal charges, there is no response. Again, it is, they would say, an authoritarian decision by the trustees, that all responsibility somewhat autocratically belongs to you and belongs to the trustees, and that at this point in 1968, this is out of date, that the students and teachers must have more of a say in the schools. That is not the university as we have known it. Do you think it's the university as we should have it?
This is, of course, a very good question. There is a limit beyond which the trustees could not divest themselves of the ultimate authority in control over a private university without changing the charter, which has not been changed since 1810.
Well, should it be changed?
This is a matter about which study is now being made. A faculty group is studying this, and a trustee group is studying this, and what their results will be, I do not know. Obviously, changes of some sort ought to develop, but not changes made under panic situations. And insofar as faculty and student attitudes about the need for this concern, I must observe that I wish some of my faculty colleagues who now are so excited about this had given some indication of concern about it before the crisis erupted.
Well, your faculty says, in fact, that this past week represented the first and second time that the entire Columbia faculty has ever been called together, that the administration has never tried to call them together, that this is one of the problems, that they have been relatively frozen out, as well as students, from the fundamental decision-making processes at the university, that this is what is wrong.
And this is not because of any desire to divide and rule. This is such a view is complete nonsense. We have 15 faculties. We have no place at the university where all of the voting members of all of the faculties can be accommodated in a single room.
Dr. Kirk, can we see this in a larger context, perhaps? There was a report from Paris that the university, the Sorbonne, was closed down for the first time since the 13th century by a student rebellion. This seems to be happening not only here, but all over the world. It began at Berkeley. It's all through this country. Do you think that it reflects perhaps a youth rebellion rather than just a student rebellion?
Yes, I do. I think I have planned to send a telegram to my old friend Jean Roche, the rector of the University of Paris, suggesting that he and I form a new club. Yes, it is in part a youth rebellion. Everyone has said, and I think with good reason, that the generational gap today is wider than any time any of us have known about or have read about.
Well, don't you feel that perhaps it's the older generation's fault?
Obviously, it's the older generation's fault to a very considerable degree, in that they have allowed young people to reach young adulthood in the belief that they have no obligation to obey rules and laws except those that please them. And this, I think, is very unfortunate.
Well, couldn't the question be put the other way, that in view of the changes in the universities and their growth, that the administrations may be at fault in not allowing for enough change so that there is a greater say by moderate student and faculty in participation?
I wouldn't for a moment deny the fact that perhaps we have been overly slow in thinking about needed organizational changes. All I have said is that I wish that students and faculty alike who are now so concerned about these things had indicated that concern at an earlier time.
Nobody seeks, Dr. Kirk, to make you say mea culpa. The point is, what do you have now in mind, having gone through this terrible time, which you're still in the midst of it? What do you have in mind for the future? What can you do to channel this into a constructive reaction?
Well, as you were saying earlier, Mr. Agronsky, this is a matter not just confined to the Columbia campus. It is not a matter just confined to American university students. This is a youth matter, a generational gap that affects nearly all Western societies. There is no easy way in which local solutions can effectively contribute in any major way.
But to recognize what it is isn't really an answer. To have some plan to deal with it is what is required. Have you any plan? Has your thinking, your experience, led you to some constructive program?
Well, obviously, as I've said earlier, in view of the new faculty interest in having a share in more policy making than they've evinced in the past, new devices must be found to supplement our existing machinery. So we have had a university council, of course, to which elected representatives from each faculty attend, and so on. Obviously, we'll have to rethink this.
What are you rethinking in terms of the students? How much power should students have at Columbia? How much power should students have at any modern Western university?
I think it depends. I think it depends upon the area of interest you're talking about. Certainly, they should have and do have a great deal of control over their individual lives. Those who live in our residence halls, they should have all the things affecting student welfare.
Should they appoint a dean of students? Or should they have a voice in the appointment of a dean of students? Should they have a voice in drawing up a new charter or constitution for the university?
I'm old-fashioned enough to believe that it is important that the governance of an institution of this kind remain, insofar as decision-making is concerned, in the hands of those who have been at it for many, many years, faculty and administration, and that the advice of students on such matters should be sought, but that it would be fatal if the student views were to be predominant.
Because
Come and go.
What do you think the lessons of the past 2 weeks at Columbia have been then for other universities?
I'm so sorry. I hope one lesson is that other universities will be prepared, if unhappily this should be the case, to face up to the ultimate crisis in the way we did, with the decision that order and respect for order must be the guiding control over administrative decision making.
Dr. Kirk, you made the administration made some very specific changes in policy. Perhaps some had been considered before, but they happened in the past week. For example, it had been long recommended that a disciplinary committee in which faculty and students would participate should exist on the campus. It wasn't formed until the past week. Equally, the administration decided not to construct that controversial gymnasium, which started this crisis. So in effect, you did have to respond to this kind of student pressure. I'd like to know to what degree your decisions are final on, say, respecting the authority of this disciplinary committee. Will you, if they recommend that certain procedures be taken or not be taken against students, will you accept that as final, or is it only advisory?
When I appointed a three-man committee to prepare the plan of organization for the so-called tripartite, now called joint committee, which is now in operation, it was agreed in this first letter sent to me by the chairman of the three-man committee that the decisions of the proposed tripartite committee would be binding on all parties, but they added the necessary sentence. We recognize, however, the ultimate responsibilities of the president of the university, which means that there's a real question as to whether the absolute and final delegation of power can be made in such matters away from the trustees and the president.
Dr. Kirk, let's carry this again a step beyond the university, though we begin on your campus. One of the reasons that this rebellion began, in addition to the gymnasium matter, which was more parochial, was that the students argued against the participation by Columbia University in secret defense research. And it raises a question for you and for all university presidents. Should a university, in its search for truth and dissemination of knowledge, which is its proper role, at the same time perform secret research for the Defense Department?
The universities all over the country are disinclined to do this because this is, in some sense, a departure from the normal spirit of a university. I would add that this particular one, concerning the Institute of Defense Analyses, is largely a phony issue in this respect, because the university does not, IDA does not contract with the university, as it merely uses the opportunity to invite individual scholars to work on special projects.
Certainly, it's under the aegis of the university.
You sit on IDA's board, do you not, sir?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
How is it phony, then?
It is phony in the sense that this is not an issue of basic importance. The issue you raised earlier is far more important. and that is, should a university engage itself in contract secret research? That's far more important.
Yes.
And I have felt that, and I still feel, that the university should make every effort to avoid this, but that if we are told by the appropriate government authorities that we have a certain expertise on our campus, not easily available anywhere else, for work upon something that is vital to the national security and protection of the United States, it ought to be awfully hard for us to say, sorry, we're not interested.
But there is a fundamental contradiction that you concede yourself in the university participating.
I recognize this as an exception to the normal university rule, and this exception ought to be as minimal as possible. We have very, very little such activity at our university, and we are not inclined to have any more unless the situation should be absolutely compelling.
Dr. Kirk, the problem at Columbia started with the activities of a very small radical group, the Students for Democratic Society. Now, you've given these students a great deal of freedom. They function still now from campus buildings. It's obvious that these students who are dedicated to revolution will continue to protest and perhaps take actions of the kind they have already taken. Do you think that they should be permitted to continue on the campus with the same freedom? Specifically, what are you going to do about SDS on your campus? What do you think should be done on all campuses with the new left?
Obviously, I must await in terms of decisions about specific disciplinary action upon recommendations to come from this newly appointed joint committee. I can't simply disregard it in dealing with this problem, because it was in part for this purpose that I set up such a committee at the request of the faculty of Columbia College and supported by a meeting of the joint faculties. It'll be very interesting to see what they do recommend about this. The university traditionally is dedicated to the free exploration of all ideas, but a university obviously cannot permit young people to do what these young people did and attempt to carry out their ideas, which is to cripple and destroy and to wreck the university. There's a difference between discussion and a difference between violence, and I must remind you that the university did not initiate violence back when it called in the police. When these young people engaged in breaking and entering, one of our men was sent to. Two of our security guards were seriously injured.
To the students, though, sir, there's a fundamental difference between their actions and yours, and they feel that you had a choice, the administration had a choice to make between property rights and human rights, and in calling in the police to protect the university's property, and for 7 days the students really didn't hurt anyone, that they were there. They felt that you opted for property rights and the subsequent brutality against the students.
I think that's an unfair dichotomy, because it's not a question of human rights versus property rights. What about the human rights of the other students who wanted to continue in classes? And what about the human rights of the professors who wanted to continue work in their own classrooms and laboratories?
Well, it is said, Dr. Kirk, that while not many students might have supported the initial protest group, after you used the police, student and faculty support for the protest became much more substantial. That the fact that you haven't given them there hasn't been more give on your part, more students say in this, is the cause for the widespread support rather than just the radical action.
One of the most painful parts of the whole decision-making process involving bringing in the police was the realization the emotional shock would alienate a great many students and faculty who might not otherwise have been in any way sympathetic with the original objectives of the students who had led this activity, or who might not understand what their true objectives were. This was something which there was no way of countering, because the emotional shock, abhorrent to all faculty people, and to myself as well. I've spent my entire life in a university of bringing in the police to do an operation of this kind.
How long do you think that shock will remain? How long do you think the polarization of attitudes in the campus will remain? When can Columbia return to being a normal university?
Obviously, scars will remain for a long time. I would hope very much that we can return just as quickly as possible to our normal operations, that we may have a breathing time during which we may be able to consider needed long-range organizational changes in a more calm atmosphere than the one that now prevails.
Dr. Kirk, I don't put this question in a critical sense, but really to reflect wide criticism that is made of you within the university area. They've asked for your resignation. Do you intend to resign?
I think if I were to resign at the present time, then I should have done so long ago, because before I undertook any of these activities. No, I do not intend to resign. I'm appointed by the trustees of the university, And I had discussed with them, obviously, because of my age, long before this arose, certain plans I had about my retirement. But I'm not going to resign under fire because that would be a victory for those who are out to wreck the university, and I cannot let down my good friends.
Thank you, Dr. Kirk, for being here to face the nation. A word about next week's guest in a moment.
Today on Face the Nation, Dr. Grayson Kirk, president of Columbia University, was interviewed by CBS News correspondent Robert Shackney. Peter Jansen, education editor of Newsweek magazine. CBS News correspondent Martin Agronsky led the questioning. Next week, following his first presidential primary bid in Indiana and 2 days before the Nebraska primary, Senator Robert Kennedy, Democrat of New York, will face the nation. Join Walter Cronkite and the CBS News team for the results of one of the key election battles of Campaign 68, the Indiana primary, live and in color Tuesday night. Face the Nation originated in color from CBS New York.